Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Finding Hope During the Global Hunger Crisis. My name is Suzanne Legina, and I have the incredible privilege of leading the Plan International Australia team, some of whom you'll get to meet tonight, and some of our international colleagues coming to you from Somalia as well. Before I commence, I just want to say a big welcome to you. I know that we've got a lot of people joining us from all different aspects of connection to us, and we're very, very happy to have you here. I want to acknowledge the land on which we are gathering, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and acknowledge that the land was never ceded and always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Tonight, we really want to introduce you to what is probably the biggest story in the world that you're not hearing about. And we want to be able to equip you with the necessary information and the powerful emotional stories to help invite you to be part of a movement for change and to bring this issue really to the fore. You will have seen in the last few days the devastating images from Turkey and Syria from the earthquake, devastating response there, numerous people impacted, especially children because of the time of day. Plan is on the ground through our partners responding to that, and people have been very generous in responding to that issue. You would have seen the heartbreaking images of rubble and people responding. What you won't know about is that all over the world, but particularly in the Horn of Africa at the moment, there is a hunger crisis that has as powerful, devastating images of suffering, especially for children and for girls and families, but that you are not seeing those on your television or in the daily newspaper. We really want to have a dialogue, so there is an opportunity for you to ask questions in the Q&A. And if you want to make comments, we encourage you to do that in the chat. Our team is behind the scenes. They will try to answer your questions. We're going to also pause for questions and answers at the end of every section. So please open up the dialogue. We want it to be a learning opportunity for us all. For those of you who are not so familiar with Plan, we are the Charity for Children and for Girls Equality. We work with children and communities all over the world, and we tackle the root causes of poverty and discrimination. We work with communities to respond to crisis. We work to connect up global issues that require global and concerted collective effort. We've done research across the world about the kind of people who support Plan, who work for Plan, and who are drawn to Plan's work. And what we've been able to distill is a kind of quality that is a golden thread through all of us. We are what we call determined optimists. We are people who see the world as it is and say, this is not how it could be. And we are prepared to take action in that space to do something about it. So we welcome you to a community, a global community of determined optimists who look at the world and don't accept that the way it is the way it needs to be. I want to talk to you a bit about our theory of change. I know this is a kind of complicated word, but you'd be delighted, I suppose, to know that our response is not scattergun. We have 80 years of experience of using evidence and our learning to inform the kinds of things that we do. So we work across a whole ecosystem to shift norms, attitudes and behaviours, to influence governments at the local, national and global level, and to think about how we also set up our social and economic global assets to ensure that children everywhere have the right to thrive, be healthy, happy and equal. We work and we try to describe our work across sort of what we call five pillars. And so our work in Learn is really around education and life skills so that children and young people are able to be financially independent and able to take their place in economies and societies. Lead is really around how we train young people, especially girls, as leaders. It's also about how we think about how that kind of leadership capability is able to influence governments and be able to have a say on the things that matter to children and young people in their own context. Decide is the pillar that we think about our work around sexual and reproductive health rights, about your right to decide when and if you marry and when and if you have children and how that will be spaced, about the right to decide your own bodily autonomy. And that's a really powerful pillar of our work. Thrive is all of our work across nutrition, water and sanitation and hygiene. It's child protection, it's positive parenting. It's all the things we do to support a child all the way from birth to adulthood. And that's all our programmatic and influence work that falls into that bucket of how do we help children and communities and young people to really thrive. And Survive is really not just how we respond in a crisis, but how we work with communities to prepare for, anticipate, and recover from crisis. So this work we're doing in Turkey and Syria, this work we're doing in the Horn of Africa, Myanmar, and many other places around the world that are in crisis really falls into that work of survival. I'm just going to pause for a minute and ask you a question, which you can answer in the chat. What do you think is the percentage increase in child marriage in Ethiopia over the last 12 months as a result of hunger? Looking for your answers. Percentage. We've got 30%, 30%, 80%, 100%, 50%. Thank you for playing. The answer is 51% because there is a definite correlation between incidents of child marriage and hunger. And the thing that you'll hear more about, but that I really wanted to just, hunger is not a word we use very often in our language, but it has a particular meaning in the context of what we're talking about. And you will know this from in the Australian context. It's why we have breakfast clubs for children, that even small periods of time of malnutrition for children at key stages in their development has implications across their entire life. And what we're learning now is that it may even have intergenerational consequences. So hunger is not a word we use lightly. And when we talk about a hunger crisis, we really are thinking about how do we avert that lifelong impact for children and young people, and how do we stop that intergenerational impact from occurring as well. These are some of the stats around where Plan works. We work in more than 83 countries around the world. That gives us a really strong global picture of what's going on. We work with more than 52 million children, and Plan International Australia alone was able to reach more than 1.6 million people over the last 12 months. That is the kind of impact, the scale of the work that we do. Just trying to paint a picture for you there of the kinds of places where we work. And this is a slide that I really love because what you just saw before is a picture of where we work and who we reach. But this is a slide about how you are part of that impact, because many of you joining fall into one or multiple of these categories. You are a child sponsor, maybe you have donated to one of our appeals, even to that Turkey and Syria one, or our hunger crisis. Potentially you are a member of our Girls Education and Empowerment Fund, or you're an equality leader, or you leverage the Australian government contribution, or you've left a gift in will. There are multiple ways that you've been able to support us, but that impact that I described, that's what you've helped create. And I want to thank you. That's my opportunity just to say how grateful you are. The way that Plan works, we only work in partnership with others. And so that's really powerful for us. Are there any questions that anyone has for me just before we move on? You can use the Q&A. There's a question here from Daniela about applying a gender lens to humanitarian responses and what does that look like on the ground. I hope that you will be able to get a sense of that as we speak tonight, but it's really recognising that in crisis, who you are has there's a kind of an intersectional lens that we bring through, which says, you know, your age, but also your gender, maybe your ethnicity, impacts on how the crisis affects you. And we always try to bring a view that tries to include the most vulnerable, the most marginalised. I was also asked a question about our focus. Plan International Australia, our focus has tended to be in the Asia Pacific region and in East Africa. They are the places where we tend to focus our effort. That doesn't mean we don't support Plan's work across the globe, but that is our focus. There'll be more times for questions, but I really want to introduce now Dave Husey. He is the Deputy CEO for Impact. He's the person that really manages our long-term development projects and our humanitarian response across the globe. He's a humanitarian himself. He's been deployed to numerous crises around the world. And he's going to give you a bit of a context of when we say hunger crisis, well, what do we actually mean? So I'm going to pass over to him.
Thanks, Suzanne, and hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I have the privilege, really, of, I suppose, introducing our approach, our work, and some of the inspirational people in our work in this particular crisis. So I will appreciate that some of what I'm going to be talking through for you today might be a bit technical or even confronting, but I hope it has come through clearly about our work and so on. So this is one of our largest and most difficult crises that we're dealing with at the moment. And the reason is that, apart from levels of scale, is that it's a very complex crisis. It has multiple contributing factors. We would point to what we call the 5 C's, for this particular crisis. They're not the only ones, but they are very front and center in terms of this particular food crisis. So we've certainly seen the impact of COVID, both in terms of the measures taken to control the spread of the virus, but also the impact on supply chains, particularly food across the world, which we felt those effects as well. Climate is a major issue facing many regions where we work, affecting production cycles, access to life-preserving resources such as water and so on, but also climatic events that in and of themselves are life-threatening, like floods and droughts in there. When we look at the food crisis, conflict is another factor that we definitely see impacting on groups and populations that we're working with. Displacement is a clear outcome of that, people moving to flee conflict lines. But conflict in and of itself degrades governance structures like governments and local governments, but also breaks access to food and supply chains as well. 2 particular effects that we're seeing over this year and last year is what we call, currency instability. Is really about local currencies and the value of money, or the inaccessible currency to be able to purchase food. We also have what we would see as commodity challenges. So commodity prices, for instance, the price of food has become such a major impact in this particular crisis that it's rendering foodstuff inaccessible to poor households and so on. So on the one hand, it's complex. As you can see, these are very deep issues and connected issues that we deal with, but it's also protracted. These conditions that we see are not likely to be resolved immediately in the short term through short-term access or short-term support, but we have to anticipate and work with unfolding effects of that. The other component about this particular crisis is that, as Suzanne said, it's disproportionate in its impact, and it certainly is disproportionate in its impact according to vulnerability. So on the next slide, you'll see that 2 particular aspects of vulnerability are very front of mind for us. One is on children, and particularly children under 5 years old, where nutrition and food, access to nutritious food is so critical for their development and is life-preserving. And the heart-wrenching statistic that we are working with at the moment in this particular crisis is that, by estimation, more than 10,000 children are at risk of dying from this crisis every single day. That is a horrifying statistic, and it's also horrifying because it is preventable. The other vulnerable group that we're very concerned about are girls, particularly. So girls as children, but also girls as young adults and adolescents. And we recognize that gender in this particular instance and being a girl places you very much in a situation of vulnerability. So if we looked at one country, let's say look at South Sudan, what we're seeing in there is the consequential effects of this particular crisis. And if you looked at those 5 C's that we saw before, it comes in different forms. And what we've seen in South Sudan is that 4 million girls are at risk or have been affected by early or forced marriage in those particular instances as a result of poverty, as a result of vulnerability, perhaps even as a result of conflict in that particular situation. So these are 2 particularly vulnerable groups that are really front and center in PLAN's work as well. I'm going to ask a question now, really that is really to draw out two salient factors about this crisis. One is it is global in effect. We are seeing it in many different places, but it's also specific in terms of impact. It has particular countries and regions and populations where we see really high impact. So I'm going to ask you if you could answer in the Q&A kind of box, where are the hungriest places on Earth? See a lot of suggestions, Bangladesh, East Africa, Sudan, Kenya, and so on. So we might have a quick look at some of the places in the current crisis that are experiencing the deepest and most widespread hunger crisis at the moment. As you can see, what it does show us is this is a global crisis. These are the hungriest places, but certainly not the only ones facing challenging situations around food access and food availability and impacts on populations. You can see that it's global. But we can also see that it is very specific in the sense that specific countries across all of these regions are experiencing very deep crises. And that starts to contextualize for us how we decide where we want to be working in a humanitarian manner. So we have a particular focus on many of these countries, and a particular focus in this webinar will be on the 2 that are highlighted in red, and that is South Sudan and Somalia. We'll just pause for a moment at this particular point, just to see if there are any general questions that you might have in relation to what I might have covered before we actually start to look at these particular countries and invite some of those really inspirational people that work in this particular crisis to join us with their thoughts. I might just pick up on the question from Daniela. Have any sponsorship programs been impacted in relation to this crisis? I think the short answer, Daniela, is yes. While some of these countries that you might have seen on the map, and certainly where PLAN works, may have suspended or not have sponsorship programs because of the context, very difficult to sustain ongoing support for sponsorship communities. A number of them do. And what we see happening in those particular contexts is while PLAN and others attempt to sustain the benefits of sponsorship for those children in those particular communities and the communities at large, plans and support programs in those particular communities have to start to integrate components that look at food support or support for production of food in those particular contexts as well. So what we see is that the programs start to adjust to the emergent needs and urgency of those needs in those particular communities as well. I see a question about other NGOs and that we might see, or humanitarian actors. Now, humanitarian actors can be international organizations like ourselves, NGOs, but as Suzanne mentioned earlier, much humanitarian response is actually undertaken by community groups in these countries that we see, and highly effective mutual self-support and so on as well. What's really important in our work is that we coordinate and we support the efforts of all in this particular crisis. It is not a situation where there is competition. It is one where there is a need for all efforts to be coordinated and leveraging across each other to achieve the best impacts here. I might move a bit on. I see that there's a number of other questions there. I will leave it up to the team. I think as we go through, we'll post up responses to some of those questions. So I hope you'll bear with me as we move on here. Now, I want to just bring us into focus on the first country of interest for us. South Sudan in Central East Africa is a country that is the newest country in the world. It became independent in 2011. Plan has been working in that particular environment prior to 2011, but certainly since 2011 has had a fairly strong country program focused on that particular country. Now, I just want to take a little moment just to explain a technical feature of how we actually assess the severity of food insecurity, and you will see this term IPC and a number following that on a number of different communications that we have, or even in the maps that you might see in the course of this presentation. What that means is there's actually a internationally accepted scale. It's called the Integrated Phase Classification. We don't need to remember that. We just remember IPC. But what it is, it's an acute food insecurity scale. It has 5 ratings on that. Number 1 on that scale would be general food insecurity, for instance. Number 2 would be moderate food insecurity on a broad basis. Number 3 is where level 3 is where we really start to get concerned. And that starts to indicate acute food and livelihoods crisis across a range of the population in that particular situation. When we get to level 4, so what you see here is IPC level 4, which is a classification for a whole region or a population. What we're talking about there is an emergency level of food insecurity, where we really need to be acting on an emergency basis to stave off starvation and long-term impacts on children in terms of food insecurity there. Now, the one that we really dread, and what you will hear us speak of with a lot of anxiety in this particular discussion, is level 5, which is really a catastrophe level. It is where we start to call the situation famine because of the extent of impact across a range of the population, where we're starting to see deaths as a result of starvation on a very broad scale. So in this particular instance, South Sudan is, as a country, approaching and in a level of IPC level 4, which is an emergency level. We will move to look at Somalia in a moment. But if we look at the statistics around South Sudan, it is the world's newest country. It has really struggled to establish those basic systems of governance that we would expect of a country, but to remembering that it was an incredibly poor country. It's been racked by conflict for many, many years. Very difficult for governments to be established in such a short space of time. So this is a country that is 11 years old, if you remember. But if you look at these statistics here, certainly the income level, 80% of the population are living under $1 a day. It is an incredibly poor country. You can see the extent of the food crisis, 7.74 million in food crisis or worse. So that would be IPC 3, 4, and 5. And then what we're also starting to see is impact on child mortality rates. But you can see the impact on girls in this particular environment, where they face multiple vulnerabilities. So not just in terms of access to food, but certainly there may be harmful practices such as early and forced marriage, or girls in particular conflict situations may actually be targets of militant groups in these particular environments as well. And then just if you look at the box on that particular slide as well, before we move on, just wanted to remind us that these are preventable deaths. We really, in our current status, in our global development and so on, we should not be seeing children dying of hunger. Certainly, I think we could agree on that. So what we do is when we look at these ratings, and we're trying to track where to direct our work with your support and with the support of our other partners, including the Australian government. What I wanted to show you is how these crises progress. So these are two maps side by side that indicate that rating that I indicated to you. So the red in itself would be IPC level 4 emergency. The very deep kind of components would be approaching IPC level 5 catastrophe, in terms of that. So if you look on the left, between July and October, you can certainly see from that categorization, a large part of the country, north and east, really experiencing deep impact and so on. So when we look at the progression of that particular crisis, if you look on the right, the following 3 months, so this is only over 3 months, you start to see, yes, that those areas designated as IPC level 4 and above, the reds, if you like, are expanding. But even more concerning, perhaps, is also if you look at the rest of the country, there's a deterioration across the country. And so we start to see other areas approaching acute crisis or emergency crisis level there. So it's a country that's really facing severe food insecurity. It is an IPC level 4, so it is that emergency level where we do need to be acting with urgency in that particular situation as well. Now, this is just to remind us that, the life of a girl in this particular instance is one that is really severely challenging. When you start to see the impacts of, again, not just kind of food insecurity, but displacement from conflict, and certainly the vulnerabilities that come through early and forced marriage as well. So we do have a particular consideration in the program here. Again, not to get too technical, but I just wanted to talk to how we direct our efforts as planned with others on particular needs and particular groups, if you like. So in South Sudan, we have what you might call a general food distribution. Now, general food distribution takes place when there is widespread food insecurity and lack of access to food. So as you can see it there in the photo, that's what it looks like. Large distributions of food across households in regions and so on. And these are very large programs. So we do run some very large programs in South Sudan as planned with support from yourselves, where we leverage support from World Food Programme as well. We also have school feeding programs, and those are very much focused, as they would say, on school meals. And we really feel that is really critical for keeping children in schools and in the education system, but also to make sure that they have at least one nutrition meal a day. They may be going home or coming from homes where there's no food available. And so really impactful, very targeted on schools there. Supplementary feeding, nutrition is a highly targeted program. So we focus on expectant and lactating mothers, but we also focus on children under 5. And there we are delivering, if you like, highly targeted nutrition support through supplements, not simply general foodstuffs, but also important micronutrients and supplements for children to be able to develop there. And then lastly, Food for Assets is to recognize that even though we're in a crisis, we do need to be looking at galvanizing the efforts and the contribution of communities themselves in not just addressing the crisis, but building up things like building up assets for the community and building up assets for households. So we have programs where food is utilized as a form of in-kind support to people in the community who are rebuilding those particular assets for households or for communities. So I've just quickly gone through to describe the range of programs that we direct at different groups. But generally speaking, that would be the bulk of our food programming in a place like South Sudan. I want to introduce you to two of our panel who have a familiarity and an experience with South Sudan. They're inspirational, both of them in their different ways. Berhe Tewoldebahan is the head of our disaster risk management practice out of the Australia office. Now, Berhe has worked in and around South Sudan for over 35 years. And throughout that time has been steadfast in his humanitarian support for the South Sudanese population, and has seen various phases throughout independence and more recently in the last 11 years of the food crisis there. I will turn over to Berhe in a moment. I also want to introduce you to Rosie Shediak, who's a very young member of our business development team in the Australian office. And recently, a call out came out from our colleagues in our South Sudan office that they needed assistance. They were really needing extra capacity and so on. And I want to appreciate Rosie for putting up her hand very quickly. She had never deployed in a humanitarian capacity before, but she offered to deploy to Juba to support our colleagues in that particular crisis for a number of months. And we will be asking Rosie for her experiences. Another aspect to Rosie's experience is also that she has grown up in Sudan as well, and has a particular understanding of the South Sudan context from that particular perspective. So I'm going to go over to Berhe, and again, this is Berhe Tewoldebahan. He heads up our disaster risk management team. What I would like to ask you, Berhe, and perhaps you could share with us, is that you recently went to South Sudan, and you were in both the capital, Juba, but you were also visiting some of the outlying towns where we have operations and programs. Could you share with us some of your reflections of what you saw, particularly with your experience of what you've seen in South Sudan over the years?
Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you all participants. And we've been looking at the figures and reports, but I'm going to talk on what I saw and witnessed during my recent visit to Juba, including the capital. Overall, as it was explained, overall the country is kind of in an emergency situation in terms of food security, because all the 5 C's that you have seen, you know, the COVID, the conflict, the climate, the commodity price and currency instability, all impacting the situation. So really crisis. And I will start with the situation in the capital, which many of us would expect relatively better in terms of, you know, employment and so on. However, I started with the capital and I saw the severe condition of food insecurity even in the capital itself. Even those who are employed, given, you know, the market price of food commodities, barely can afford 1 meal a day, and that's how severe it is. And even in the capital, I've seen quite a huge number of internally displaced population. We call them IDPs, and they're all in IDP camp and totally dependent on food assistance. These are people who came from the surrounding villages and including remote areas because of the food insecurity all over. And so it's really serious. And I've seen even in the capital itself, young children and even adults scavenging, you know, food remains from, garbage collection points, say thrown by the hotels or restaurants or whatever. So that's really a serious indicator of how severe the food situation, even in the capital. Now, as you move out further, the situation is even worse. So I was able to travel from the capital itself to another state north of the capital where we have operations. And what I saw is the same. All over the country is the same situation. Rumbek, it's called Rumbek. It's about 1 hour flight. It's not possible to go by road because of insecurity, but the situation there was even worse. I attended kind of several meetings with plant staff there, World Food Program staff, government officials, and even kind of went around the town to see how the market looks like and meet some of the IDPs. The food insecurity is incredibly, really severe. It's 4 overall, but in some areas it could be over 4. So that's what I really witnessed. And during all those meetings, I was told how people stay for days without meal. I was told a report of, a mother and a child died at home because of lack of food. And I've also seen schools cannot operate without the school meal. As you saw the modalities we employ in implementing food security. Schools cannot run without the school meal provision that PLAN and other NGOs provide on the ground. And I can tell you how important and critical it is, the school meal program. One, critically, it addresses nutrition, that's the only available meal they can get. And intervening at such an early stage for school children is very, very important, of course. If we don't, then the consequences grave for a longer period. The other one is addressing education. Basically, we say even if it is in crisis or what, education cannot wait, because if it waits, then the damage in the long term is serious. So in a way, it addresses both situations, on the school meal. Just to give you an idea how I saw the situation, because I knew South Sudan before, I've traveled a lot, I've worked there a lot, and even with PLAN for the last 11 years or so, I've been traveling back and forth once a year at least, if not twice or so. This one is really serious. The last, crisis that I know is primarily affected or impacted by climate change and conflict, but this one is really by the 5 C's we mentioned. So you can imagine how the impact all over the country is. We've said it is the emergency situation. In some areas, it's really even more serious. Now, just to tell you what reminded me when I was there recently is really a story that I know, and I was there also at that time of 2017. The Nile is a west and eastern side. So on the eastern side of the Nile, there was a really serious ethnic conflict, and many of those who were really attacked, they were running away towards the western side, which was relatively safe. Many actually even died as they crossed the river, attacked by crocodiles or even swept by the current. 2 young children miraculously, survived and crossed with the others, and they happened to be in one of the centers that PLAN established, what we call child-friendly space. Now, the 2 children, one is the eldest is 9, the other one is about 3. And I noticed, including my colleagues, the 2 were always closely together. The elder one, the 9 years old, was holding her younger sister, throughout. And the main reason is that both parents, mother and father, were killed in that conflict. So they survived miraculously and end up in this one. Now, this reminds me a bit of the current situation. Now, I could imagine how many such children may have been affected by the current, 5 Cs, and I can imagine multiple, many. So that's really, in short, what I witnessed, and in question and answer, I can respond, and I'll leave it at that point.
Thank you so much, Bohea. I know those must have been very confronting scenes, even for you. As a seasoned humanitarian, you never get used to those kind of challenges. So thank you for sharing, those particular reflections for us. I want to just, switch to Rosie and invite Rosie. Rosie, you recently spent some time with our South Sudanese colleagues in our South Sudan operation. Now, this is a team that is South Sudanese. They appreciated the support that, of course, you were providing us on. But can I just ask you about what you found in that experience of working with that team and addressing this particular crisis?
Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you for the lovely introduction earlier. As Dave mentioned, the opportunity actually came from the Plan South Sudan office for me to be seconded there. The reason being is to help with fundraising activities. And that is my role here in Melbourne as a business development officer. South Sudan is known to be a fragile state and therefore gets a lot of negative media attention. So finding people to relocate their personal and professional lives to South Sudan can be challenging. It is a non-family posting, given the complexities of the country. Now, given my background, as Dave mentioned, and just being part of the Plan International movement, I really wanted to help be a helping hand to provide, education, child protection, nutrition to children and families in this protracted crises. Now, obviously, having to relocate my life from Melbourne to South Sudan was a bit of an adjustment. It was very daring to me and confronting, but I got there. I was on super high alert all the time, and I was, anything could happen at any minute. That was, my thinking behind it. But what made my experience so rich and so rewarding were my South Sudanese colleagues. I mean, the sense of enthusiasm, the energy that everyone brings to the office every day, offline and online, was really humbling, and it brought a lot of hope and kept me going. I'm just going to share a couple of stories really quickly. Just before I got there, I obviously had all these thoughts happening in my head, and when I arrived there, I got introduced to the team very, very quickly, got into proposal writing. And so we had a submission to push in basically a couple of days after I had arrived. Now, there were feared protests about an event that was happening in the capital, Juba. We got an email from HR to say that the office will be closing and that, advised everyone to stay at home, but we really needed to submit that proposal within 48 hours. So everyone was just running around, trying to figure out the sort of action plan from that to get that proposal in. And so we had, a lot of my South Sudanese colleagues, they don't have electricity at home. They don't have internet broadband. They do come from humble, households. And so everyone was just buying in that airtime to get it on their phones, charging their mobile phones, their laptops, so that we can just get communicating and basically just get the proposal in the time. And obviously for me, that was just really, I can't describe that experience. That is the context that you work in, and you just have to get the job done. Another story was from another team member, really, really quickly. She came into the office one morning. She said she was mugged on her way to work. She had stopped to get breakfast. There is petty crime in Juba, the capital. The person jumped into her car, wanted to steal her laptop, and she told me that she actually challenged the mugger and said that this laptop saves lives. I'm going to have this back. And so gave her phone in exchange. So yeah, just, I can't explain it. It's just, yeah, really, really rewarding and rich experience. And I can't even put it to words. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Rosie. I can see it's really had an impression on you, and really, I think, appreciating all of our South Sudanese colleagues who are working under such conditions as well. What I'd like to do is invite you as our participants to really post up any questions you might have. We're moving through fairly quickly, and as you can see, it's quite a lot to get through. We might, as a result, we don't want to cramp, in a sense, the perspectives that are really valuable for understanding this context too much. So we might run just warning that we might run 5 or 10 minutes just over the scheduled time. But if you can post up your questions, we will try, together with the panel and so on, we will try and answer those as much as we can as we go forward. So please do post them up. I want to switch on to the other country of particular concern and focus for us from Australia. And rather than me explaining the context, of that particular country, which is Somalia, I'm going to introduce someone a colleague who is really inspirational, I would say, to all of us. We see her in action every week, Sadia. We see you really out there putting your heart and your life on the line, actually, in terms of dealing with this crisis in Somalia. So I'd like to introduce you to everyone else. And as this is Sadia Alin. She is our head of mission in Somalia, acts as the country director for operations. She's responsible really for positioning plan with all of the support that we get, plan programs, very importantly, amongst all of the other agencies and community groups that work in Somalia, but really searching for the highest points of impact and leverage that we can get for influencing the situation positively there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Sadia, to perhaps take us through your reflections on the context in Somalia. And just to note for everyone, Sadia is coming to us from Hargeisa in Somaliland, directly from there. So thank you so much, Sadia, for joining us today. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Dave, for the kind introduction. And thank you so much, all the audience. You found a place in your heart and in your mind. This is important, and that's the reason that you dialed this call. So thank you so much. My heart goes out to those who have been impacted, killed in the earthquake, but the scale cannot be compared. But with this one, it's something that you can do. Hunger is killing. It's like a machine that nobody hears, and it is not mostly published in the media outlet that you see every day. What we see on the ground is very grim, and the situation is deteriorating every minute. Hunger is ravaging the Horn of Africa, destroying lives and livelihood. Somalia is the most impacted country in the Horn of Africa, where more than half of the population are facing high level of food insecurity. Mothers are making a very horrifying decisions. Mothers like Amina, whom I met one of the IDBs. The sound of growling hungry hyenas and the crashing bones are the sound that will haunt Amina the rest of her life if she survives from the hunger carnage. I met her in one of the IDBs. She told us she worked days and nights for her 4 kids in search for water and food. Her daughter Sarah, who was 5 years old, died on the way. Amina did not have the luxury to bury her daughter in a dignifying way. Instead, She left her on the road to save others. In a very devastating and anguishing voice, she said, "When I heard the sound of the growling hyenas and crashing bones, I stopped, hoping that she might cry." But she did not. Like a war zone, people are abandoning their homes in search for water and food. And unlike Ukraine, there's no NATO alliance. Stabilization centers are filled with malnourished children, and many of them are dying in home. They are dying in the most painful and anguishing way that's preventable. It is devastating that we have reached the point that if nothing happens, by June this year, 500,000 of children, Somali children, will die from hunger. Most disturbingly, girls and young women are the most impacted ones. When food is scarce, girls often they eat less, and they give up for their food for the others. They are likely, more than the boys, to be taken out of the school, to face gender-based violence and married early age. I have witnessed the anguish and the pain of hungry girls and their experience because they have to stay at the end of the queue. The clock is ticking. Each day without a greater international aid is another life lost. Unless humanitarian aid is urgently and immediately stepped up, we face the situation where we lose lives needlessly. Countless of others will face other dangers and right violations such as rape, violence, early marriage, forced marriage. Hunger is not only killing, it's also robbing the future of Somali children. As we speak today, more than 2.4 million children are out of school because of the hunger, and majority of them are girls. Together with our local partners, we are on the ground responding with water tracking, cash assistance, using money mobile transfer, and protection centrality in all our response. The capacity that we have to respond is possible, but sadly, the amount of funds that we have available is a drop in the ocean. Today, it is our choice, a moral choice, because unless we act, starvation will kill, just as surely as bullets and bombs killing Ukraine. My appeal to this audience today, will you prioritize hunger crisis to your personal, professional life? The inaction today will cost one life in every 40 seconds, and it will be unforgiving scar to humanity, and no one will say, "I didn't know." The window of opportunity is closing fast, and it is time to act now. We are not only running out of food, but also we are running out of time, and this is the time to act. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sadia, for such a powerful reflection and sharing with us what are, I think, kind of very emotional kind of perspectives and so on. Suzanne, we might move to just a few reflections from the panel, perhaps with Sadia. Perhaps I'd invite you, whether you have any thoughts or even questions for Sadia.
Sadia, I just wanted to say again, thank you from our team. I've put in the chat, you are a powerful advocate for the Somali people. I know this is very emotional for you. It is for us as well. But I really wanted you to talk a little bit about the resilience of the Somali people. And I have heard so many stories on the ground about, you sometimes get this perspective that like, oh, there's this thing going on in the Horn of Africa and, yeah, you need people here to help. But actually what I keep hearing from you and from others is how generous Somali people are being to each other despite the crisis. And I had a journalist who visited the other day who said they were in one of these kind of malnutrition centres, and there were remarkably very few deaths on the day they were there. And that was all due to the skill and the work of local health workers who were doing everything in their power to stop children from dying. And so I just wanted you to talk a little bit about like how Somali people are responding to each other and why this call for us to help now is so important.
Yeah, thank you so much. And given the limited resource households in Somalia, they tend to rely on self-insurance, including reliance of family, friends, clan networks before they seek help. And that's when they exhausted all coping mechanisms when they reach out to assistance. I have seen this family who have been hungry for days. They had left one goat and one sheep. And I asked, what are you doing? Why don't you go and join IDPs where you can get support? And they said, as long as we have a breathing animal, we will not give up. We will not surrender. And that's the resilience people they show. What is also remarkable is that the sharing spirit of the people. If you give them 1 kg of rice, they will share. And no matter how much limited the resource that you give, they will share. And sometimes it will, instead of giving them like 1 month for one thing for one family, it takes only 5 days because everyone is sharing. And if that's not the case, these people will have long gone, and because today they are exhausted, all coping mechanisms. That's why they're calling for help, and that's why we need to respond and support them.
Yeah, thanks, Sadie. I think it's really important to remember how much in a crisis it's actually your friends and your family and your local community who are the ones who will help you and are helping you. But this call out from the global community is because it really has got to a level which you need help.
So I wonder we might I have an eye on time, and I think all of you have been very gracious in keeping with us with what's been a fairly fast moving coverage of all of these issues. Just before we hand back to Suzanne to kind of take us home, it'd be I'd like to just maybe ask Sadia or Berhe, just really looking ahead at what we see ahead of us this year. What is going to help? And particularly, given this particular discussion that we're having here, it seems quite overwhelming from where we might sit, but what does help and what will help in the course of the year? I wonder, perhaps, Sadia, if you'd like to have a few comments on that, and then Berhe, we might ask you with a view to South Sudan.
One thing history told us is the timeless of our response when there is a crisis. So a timely response, immediate humanitarian response is what we need. People, they need food, what to eat. They need water because it has been lack of water. There was no water in the last 2 years, and it is predicted it will not come even this year. There's no even expected rain for this year. So immediate at the scale response, that's what we need. And making sure that we are also prioritizing protection in our all programs, making our humanitarian programming gender transformatives, where we bring in also gender equality in the response.
Right, thank you. Berhe, any thoughts?
Yes, yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to kind of make a point that I was trying to compare, for example, some years back to the current situation. And even in those days, as I said, conflict and climate change were probably the dominant sort of impacting on livelihoods. But in areas where things were relatively peaceful, the Southern Sudanese were really relying on their normal livelihoods. And I really want to emphasize how resilient they are and so on. But this time round, with all those 5 C's, it has really impacted, exhausted their livelihood means. And that's why I think the declaration, be it by the government, by the communities or the church institutions, for global support is critical, because to come out from this, unheard of kind of crisis, level 4 and above, and covering the whole country. So that is really I want to emphasize. And if the world can help to go back to where they were, resilient and dependent on their own livelihood, that's even a big step. And I think I can see always a good future for. And as Sadia was also emphasizing, the situation is not even only in South Sudan or Somalia, it's the whole of Horn of Africa. So you can see maybe specifically Somalia and South Sudan are very much impacted, highly impacted. The level may differ, but it's the whole region. So it's really time for the world community to come up and really save this situation. What can be done? I think first and foremost, also I would like to say that the first funding that we get from our supporters, that's right, the first intervention we do in such situation. And that first intervention, which is very critical, leverages even more. So I just want to thank all supporters that their contribution to the first intervention is very critical. I think Suzanne was emphasizing, if we don't act early, the damage is even for a longer period. So that's one. So we really, I think, jointly need to appeal to Australian public for more support, especially at this critical period until people are out of it and then they go to their normal livelihood. I think we can jointly also appeal to the government of Australia to really, this is a time to act, this is a time to help, this is really where global solidarity in terms of getting out of this critical crisis is. So I just want to make those 2 points really on this is my reflection. Thank you.
I was just going to, there's a couple of questions I'm going to ask each of you. Sadia, how, do the local community that you're working with in Somalia, do they welcome plans, partnership with them and the work that we're doing on the ground? How do they perceive the work we do?
Absolutely. As I said, the timeliness of the response is critical. It is between life and death, and that's what people experience it from us on the ground. And last month when I was in the field, that's the appreciation that we received from the community, saying it was not only the support that we needed, but it came to the right time, in a timely manner. And you reduced the time to do the technical work and put more focus on the life saving. And also I want to take this opportunity to thank our Australia team for their support and technical support and financial support. And I'm calling, as Berhe said, we need global solidarity. This is human race. Together we can support each other. We can end those crises like hunger. It is something that's in our power, something that we can do about it. And it is very devastating and absolutely unacceptable for someone to die from hunger, something that we take for granted.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you. There's another question just about the impact that it's having on staff and on your volunteers. And I guess, as you've just described, those people live inside these contexts as well. This is their people, their families, so they are being personally impacted by these experiences as well.
Yeah, and absolutely, you feel guilt. Yesterday, I was traveling from in Sweden. I did not sleep. And then I was on a meeting until 11 o'clock last night. wake up this morning, I have not eaten breakfast yet, and still I'm not feeling any hunger because I know someone somewhere has not having a food on their table, but at least I have some, maybe what I want to eat. So that solidarity is also important, and that's what Oyster staff are doing. That's what the community also are doing.
Thank you. And I'm going to wrap up now. I think you said it the best, Sadia. I couldn't do it better than what you did. You said, this is a human race. We need global solidarity. We can't look away from what we are seeing. What we know is that the numbers kind of start to not be meaningful after a while, but I look at the numbers and I say millions of people, including children, are at risk from dying from hunger. And I cannot, in good confidence, look away from what I am seeing and what you're telling me we are seeing. I know that time is of the essence, but there is still more we can do. We need a global response. What I wanted to pick up on was this idea of determined optimists. We are people who look at what's happening and don't accept that that's the way it needs to be. One of my favourite essayists is a woman called Rebecca Solnit, and she writes about hope like this. And so what we're asking you today is, you're already probably doing something very generous for us, but we're asking you to consider what is one more thing that you could do. If you could do one more thing, what would that be? But Rebecca says, hope is not a lottery ticket that you can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. It's an axe that you break down doors with in an emergency, because hope should shove you out the door, because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures and the grinding down of the poor and the marginal. To hope is to give yourself to the future. And that commitment to the future is what makes the present inhabitable. And so that's why, as a child rights agency, we are so invested in the future. That is what we exist for, those young people, those children we serve. So we are asking you, what one more thing can you do? You could live your values by donating through one of the mechanisms we have. You could give money to our appeals, be a child sponsor, you could be a Change for Girls supporter, or you could suggest that to one of your friends. You could invest in leverage through the Girls Education Empowerment Fund. Even today, any donation that you make today to the Hunger Appeal will be multiplied 15 times by the World Food Programme. So that's something you could do immediately. If you are a partner or a corporate, or you have access to those, partnering with us is a really powerful way that we can get this vision out to more people, because we need to build a much bigger movement. You can advocate. I need people in the Australian community. When I went and did my lobbying round last May, the government said, if you can make this an issue for the Australian people, we'll act. So my job is to make this an issue that Australian people care about enough that they will push governments to act. But you can sign one of our petitions, you can write to Minister Wong or Minister Conroy, you can call on the Australian government to contribute to the Education Cannot Wait Fund, or to some of these hunger funds that are globally being put together. You can leave a legacy in your will. You can just talk to one other person when you leave here about what you heard tonight. Please consider what's that one more thing you can do, because our commitment to the future is what makes the present kind of bearable. And I can't thank you enough for joining us as we went over time. And can I also just give a powerful thank you to my team. Webinars like this look very seamless, but there's an army of people behind the scenes who've done all the work, make us look good. Can I say thank you to all of them? To Sadia in particular, who is the tireless advocate all over the world. She is talking to governments, she's on the radio, she is everywhere she can be. Can you amplify her voice, what you heard tonight, amongst your community, so that we can do more? I hope that we've left you with some facts and some information, some insight that you can use. And I hope we've left you with some inspiration to do something, both as an individual and collectively together, so that we can tackle this issue. So grateful for your support. Please reach out with any questions you have, and our team will be in contact with you over the next couple of days to see how we can facilitate or amplify anything else you want to do. Okay, so they've put the link in the chat. You can click on that. There's a QR code. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to just do one more thing. If you have it in your power to be able to do it, we'd be very, very grateful. Thank you, everybody, for your ongoing support of Plan's work. We would be nothing without you, so we're really grateful. Look forward to continuing the dialogue over this and many other issues that the world's facing and that we're leaning into.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sadia. Thank you, Berhe. Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you, everyone.
And all the
Thank you,
team behind the
everyone.
scenes.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, everybody.